You can't earn trust in one conversation, but the split-second pause before you answer can quietly prove you're reliable to a stranger. In this video, you'll see how that tiny moment signals restraint and follow through, and why the people who notice it decide whether you're safe long before you ever say your final word. Reliability to strangers often starts as timing, not wording. When you pause before answering, your words feel chosen instead of thrown out, and your listener treats that care as a signal of trust. That tiny delay lets your mind check facts, and it lets your voice show restraint. When people cannot verify you yet, restraint reads like accountability. On a busy street, a casual promise can die fast if it sounds automatic. But if you take a breath, keep eye contact, and answer after the thought lands, the promise has weight. In that moment, the pause works like a receipt printer. It does not prove the item, but it shows you took time to get it right. In the classic trust game, designed by Elizabeth Berg, John Dickhaut, and Kevin McCabe in 1995, one person decides whether to send money to a stranger. The receiver then chooses whether to return more than what was sent. The whole interaction runs on belief because neither side can check the other's character in advance. Notice how the first move is a kind of waiting. The sender has to risk their money before learning what the receiver really values. When the receiver later responds with care, the sender updates trust fast, because the response shows how the receiver handled uncertainty. This is what your pause mimics in real life. Before you answer a sensitive question, you are not asking for trust. You are showing whether you can hold risk without blurting. Game theorists Charness and Dufwenberg studied how promises change behavior in social games with a paper titled A Promising in Games in 2006. In their setup, a promise can become a commitment that influences what people do later. The key is not just saying words, it is whether those words become costly to break. Track how a promise that costs something becomes believable to someone who has never met you. When a person can back away easily, the promise feels cheap. When a person must bear a cost to keep changing the plan, the promise feels anchored. Your pause works the same way in everyday speech. You do not incur a formal cost like a game mechanic, but you create a small barrier between impulse and output. That barrier makes the answer feel harder to fake on the spot, especially when the other person is watching for signs. Sociologists Harvey Sachs, Emmanuel Schegloff, and Gail Jefferson laid out how conversations organize timing in 1974, their study of a turn-taking in talk. Their work showed that pauses are not random blanks. They often function as signals that the speaker is ready, deciding or handing the floor. Notice how a silence before your answer changes the listener's interpretation of who is in control. A fast reply can sound like the speaker had a ready script and is just reading it off. A measured pause can sound like the speaker is coordinating meaning and choosing the next words. Strangers pick up those timing rules even if they never studied them. In a checkout line, you can see it when someone responds after a beat instead of instantly. That beat tells your brain that the other person is doing the mental work in real time. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet made people famous for discovering a measurable brain signal, often called the readiness potential in experiments reported in the early 1980s. The basic finding is that brain activity linked to deciding can begin before a person reports a conscious choice. It does not mean people act blindly, but it does mean a feeling ready has a timing story inside the mind. Compare how your body reacts when you answer instantly versus after a pause. An instant reply can reflect the first wave of readiness without the later check that catches mistakes. A pause lets the later check contribute to what you say, which is why your words can come out cleaner and calmer. Strangers cannot see your brain, so they use timing as a proxy. A half-beat delay becomes a public trace of internal evaluation. That trace is especially persuasive when the topic is uncertain and the other person cannot test you yet. Courtrooms and official settings often use oath rituals that force measured speech, including deliberate pauses before key lines. These procedures exist because the legal system treats spoken commitments as serious actions, not casual conversation. The pause is part of the signal that the person accepts responsibility for what comes next. Picture the difference when a sworn statement starts immediately versus after the oath is formally called. People interpret the rushed version as less controlled, even if the words are identical. The measured version reads as someone taking a moment to align intent with output. When you promise a neighbor that you will do something specific, you are not in a courtroom, but you face the same social problem. Your listener needs evidence that your words will govern your behavior. A pause is one of the few pieces of evidence your listener can observe instantly. Police interviews and bodycam transcripts often reveal a consistent pattern. Good questioners allow space after a prompt instead of racing to fill silence. In real interviews, that space helps the person being questioned organize their memory. When someone answers too quickly, contradictions often follow because the answer was formed under pressure. Track how the pace changes when the questioner waits a beat. The response becomes more specific, and the person has a chance to clarify what they mean, rather than blur it in panic. That matters because strangers judge reliability by how often answers stay coherent after the first response. This is the street version of a lab control. Silence stops the interaction from becoming a scramble for the first acceptable output. Your pause buys you a chance to pick the right meaning, and it buys your listener a reason to trust that you did. A pause before answering turns an untestable promise into a visible process. Notice how the listener treats timing as evidence of internal restraint when they cannot check facts or past behavior. That restraint reduces the chance of snap decisions that later collapse under scrutiny. Reliability is not just what you say. It is whether the timing of your response matches the seriousness of what you are offering. In experiments and formal models, credibility grows when commitments create friction for easy reversal, like promise structures in game study. In conversation research, pauses help people coordinate turns and interpret readiness, which keeps meaning from turning into noise. In daily life, a deliberate half-beat signals that you are not trying to win the moment, you are trying to get it right.